Neil Fair. Okay. Hello, everyone watching on the YouTube. Probably more folks later than now. Ellen, you got power back.
You know, it was horrible last week. There were sometimes we had power and then it would go out again.
Boy.
And then it would come on like 2 o'clock in the morning, which didn't mean no good. And then it would go off again at 3 o'clock.
Mm.
Did you have power?
So I was among the lucky few in Robbinsville that never lost power, but we had congregants out for days and days.
We didn't get our anything back until Sunday.
Yeah, well, but we had power. We had a.
Oh, we had power. We have a generator. We had no internet.
Oh, yeah.
You're a rabbi. No, nobody would turn off your electricity.
So when was it? It was Sandy. I was living in Jersey City. My apartment building lost power for at least a week. I fled to Lawrenceville because my parents miraculously had power. And I remember being with my dad driving in the hopes of finding gas. And we were so dumb. We both rode in my car, which was like next to empty. And instead of him following me in his full tank car, but that's okay. We luckily found gas just south of here. And I lived to tell the tale, but it was quite an exciting time.
I tell you, that's why we have a generator, because we were here for 3 weeks without any, and I couldn't get a hotel room that would accommodate Arnold.
Oh,
So
terrible.
So after that, we said, that's it.
Enough is enough.
So Rabbi, I just want to let you know that I'm going to be on, but I'm just going to be listening. So I don't want to be rude, and I want to thank you in advance.
Thank you, Betsy. No, I'm glad you were able to make it.
Thanks.
And don't mind me, I'm finishing my lunch, everyone. I'm in back-to-back Zooms today.
Bang, Zoom.
Zoom in here and Zoom in there.
Morning,
Rabbi, I
Rabbi.
sent you a message and you are the host now.
Thank you so much.
Hostess with the mo-
All right, we'll wait. We'll schmooze another 2 minutes and then we'll get started.
It's a Jewish time clock, right?
What'd you say, Arnie?
I said it's a Jewish time clock. That's
Of
why
course.
you start 5 minutes later.
I went to Brandeis University and every class started, I forget if it was 5 or 10 minutes past the hour because we were on Jewish time.
Yeah. You have to see what their library looks like.
Mm.
I attended a program on the library. Oh my God.
Have they redone it in recent years?
I believe they have, because they turned around and spoke about how everything is changed in the last several years there.
Gotcha. Oh, wow. So what I remember is it was built into a hill because Brandeis is built on a hill. And so you enter the building at the top and you have to go down to access the shelf.
I mentioned that. Yeah. They're putting everything digital. They're putting the entire library on a digital basis.
Wow.
My son went to Brandeis. I'm wearing his shirt today.
Wow.
Was his name Louis?
If
only.
I'm a co-president of the local Brandeis chapter here.
And she does a beautiful job of it.
So let me understand something, Rabbi. In a meeting about why we fast, you're eating lunch?
Yes, 2 weeks in a row. It's a lunch and learn. The irony is not lost on me.
Right?
Although I promise to finish before I teach.
Shouldn't have been called for 12 o'clock, right?
Well, our hope was that people who are busy with work are able to sort of duck out at lunchtime. Evelyn, what do you want to share?
Did you want the did you want the email?
Oh, yes, please.
You got a pencil?
I've got a pen.
Okay, E. Kurtzberg, KURTZBERG @gmail.com.
That was easy enough.
Yes.
Great. And Pat is trying to get in, but got stuck. Pat Clarefield is trying to join us. We are recording again today so that folks who can't make it now can catch up later. Just so everyone knows, no surprise there. And I'm hoping Pat will get in, but I guess we'll have to start without her and she'll be able to join us shortly. How was everybody's week?
Better than last.
Just so you
Better
don't
than
think,
that.
just so you don't think I'm rude, I'm gonna chuck out of here about 12:30, 12:40, something like that.
Understood. Okay. If you're driving, drive safely.
Actually, meeting for lunch over at City Streets, if anyone wants to
Nice.
join us.
Oh, that's right. Oh, if only I weren't in
Wednesday.
back-to-back Zooms all day. Okay, I'm gonna share my screen again. Okay, can everyone see my PowerPoint presentation?
I can see it.
Yes.
I mix up my color scheme just to keep things interesting.
You
Okay.
see it, you can't read it.
No? Okay.
The sides are very small. I'm sure you're gonna make them larger one at a time.
Well, hopefully you can see the big slide in the middle, no?
Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Okay, okay.
One of the age eyesight is a little bit limited, you know?
Mm-hmm. No, I tried to make the font as big as I could. So here, let me make
Oh,
this
that's
a little bigger.
Yeah, that's good. No,
Okay.
that's
Okay, great. Okay, so last week we were in chapter 1 of Mishnah Ta'anit, this early legal compendium edited by around the year 200, attributed to Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, Judah the Prince. He was the head of his rabbinic colleagues. That word Nasi is going to come out again today. So this is a title among the rabbis. So think of it akin to the chief rabbi. And we explored different ideas about why our community would fast in ancient times. We are looking at at the moment, we are not yet looking at fast days that are already on the calendar. This is basically when we have an existential crisis that emerges, predominantly not enough rain for crops to grow and for life to sustain itself. And so this was our ancestors' response to something that was out of their control. And so now we looked at chapter 1. For anyone who wasn't here last week, I'm happy to share both the PowerPoint presentation and the recording, a link to the recording on YouTube with you. So happy to do that. I'm writing down everyone's name so I know who we've got this week. And we're going to launch into chapter 2 this week, and we're going to be looking at biblical stories. And the Mishnah has to root everything in the Torah. And they considered the written Torah to be the entire Hebrew Bible, so that corpus. Where they're often going to refer back to it, and we're going to see that in multiple times today. All right. Chapter 2, Mishnah number 1. I'm hoping that today we don't get bogged down with all the details of some of the rituals, but trying to pull on the big threads and pulling out those larger themes. Do I have any volunteers to read the slide? Vivian, thank you.
What is the order of service for fast days? They take the ark out of the open space of the city, and they put ashes on the ark and on the head of the Nasi and on the head of the court. And everyone else puts ashes on their own head. The elder among them says in front of them words of admonition. Brothers and sisters, it does not say of the people of Nineveh, and God saw their sackcloth and their fasting, but God saw their deeds, for they turned from their evil way. Jonah 3:10. And the prophets, it says, and rend your heart and not your garments. Joel 2:13.
Okay, so we have 2 biblical references here, one from the prophetic book of Jonah, which we read on Yom Kippur afternoon, and one from the prophetic book of Joel. So The Bible has 3 parts. Torah is the 5 books of Moses. Second is the book of Nevi'im or prophets. That's where these texts come from. And the third is Ketuvim or the book of writings. So we go back to the beginning of the slide. What is the choreography for a fast day? So this is the ritual choreography. What is the core ingredient listed here?
The Torah.
So it's actually not the Torah,
Yeah.
the Ark of the Covenant. So we have to remember this is before we used the Torah scroll as we're familiar with it. The Ark here is the Ark of the Covenant, which held the tablets of the covenant inside of them. But just as today, we place the Ark that contains the Torah scroll in the center of our worship, the Ark of the biblical period was very much an instrumental component to different rituals. Okay, so we have the Ark. What else? The one that plays an even larger role than potentially the Ark. The word that's repeated over and over, Fran.
Ashes seem to play a pretty big role here.
Okay, ashes. And it's so interesting that as I was studying this myself for the first time, I see ashes and I was thinking of biblical stories that I'm familiar with where ashes are used as a sign of usually, anyone know?
Usually mourning or penitence.
Mourning, exactly. So let's just assume no one has died yet. Let's say we're in a drought, but no one has died yet. Why are we utilizing the ritual of mourning in this fast?
Probably to prevent it.
Aha. And so there's a preemptive sense of mourning, but the hope is that if we mourn now, we won't have to mourn later. Exactly. So here we have ashes being worn as a mark of mourning, and it's a physical reminder that we're in a different status right now.
It sounds like what they call sympathetic magic.
Sympathetic magic,
Yes.
is that what you
Yeah.
said? For sure.
Yeah.
Like carrying an umbrella so it won't rain.
So it won't rain.
Exactly. Only now we're wearing ashes so it will rain.
Yes.
Exactly.
And one of the stories that actually came to my mind of sackcloth and ashes was the story of Jonah, because when he gets to the city of Nineveh,
Yeah.
he puts on the sackcloth and ashes and tells everyone else to do the same thing. And do they?
Yes,
They do.
do.
Sure.
they do it.
They absolutely do. And I love that even though the story of Jonah ends the way we want it to, that the people turn away from their evil deeds and God saves them, the crucial biblical text for this teaching is not from the book of Jonah, but from the book of Joel. And why is the quote from Joel brought in? Alan.
Well,
Not just for show. You have to really feel that it's not the show of ripping your garment. It's your heart is really repentant, and that's what counts.
Evelyn, is there anything you wanted to add to that?
Oh, I think that was the message. It isn't the ashes. It isn't the torn, cloth. It's what you're doing, the deed.
Exactly. And I'm reminded of the Yom Kippur scriptural reading, where is this the fast I asked for? I don't want you to go through the motions. You really got to mean it. And you can't just give lip service to repentance. You really have to want it. So what is this coming to teach us about when you're preparing for fasting in this context?
Think about why you're doing it.
It's not as simple as carrying the umbrella around.
Right.
That it can't stop there. You have to put the ashes on. You have to take the ark out of its enclosed sacred space and come out into the public, but it can't end there. There has to be an intention behind the action. And we're going to see that idea play out even further in the next slide. Any other thoughts or questions or comments on this slide? Alan.
The Ash Wednesday in Catholicism, that ash sort of came out of nowhere, but now you sort of see maybe where the link is.
It all came out of the same religious milieu in the ancient Near East. Absolutely. Absolutely. And, you know, every religious tradition has a physical way to mark mourning or a transition of some kind. Like we see this repeatedly. You know, some other traditions share the use of ashes, but there are other ways as well. And Fran, I don't know if you know any more about I'm just trying to remember exactly why ashes are placed on the forehead for Ash Wednesday.
I don't know.
Isn't
Okay.
that like the body of Christ or something? Doesn't
It
that
has to
represent
do
that?
with the death of Jesus, and it's
Yeah.
tied to the resurrection as it's tied
Yeah.
to Easter, but I personally can't remember, but I imagine, you know, I know it's supposed to mark you publicly, but I forget exactly if it's an act of mourning or not.
It would make sense, obviously,
Right.
especially if it comes from this.
Okay, so we get the point here that there is choreography and props associated with the ritual of fasting, but but the most important piece is the intention. So let's keep going. Okay. All right. Who'd like to read this slide, and I will make it a little larger. Okay. Who'd like to read? Alan, go for it.
When they stand up to pray, they bring down before the ark an old man conversant with prayer, one who has children and whose house is empty of food, so that his heart is complete prayer. He recites before them 24 benedictions, the 18th recited daily, to which he adds 6.
We'll get into the weeds in just a moment. Why is this kind of a person chosen for the job? So this is, you're picking who's going to be the leader of the service.
Well, you're taking someone who's, I mean, in Hebrew, it says Zaken v'ragil. So it's like Joe Schmo. You're taking your average guy who is vested in this working because he has to have sons, because obviously daughters don't count, but he has no food in the house. By the way, in Hebrew, it doesn't mention the word food. I'm guessing that's the understanding.
Right. It's the euphemism that the rabbis are
Okay.
using.
Okay.
So right, but why is children and an empty house of food? Why is that the important piece?
I have to feed them, and I need the rain, so I have the crops, so I have the food. So, you know.
So basically, you want to get somebody who's going to have that intention in their heart. If there's somebody who's going to lead everybody else in these special prayers, so we get these 6 added prayers to the regular 18. We'll talk about that in a second. If we're then we need somebody whose heart is totally in it, because it's not enough to go through the motions. We need to have the intention too. All right, let's talk about just so you have some familiarity with the mechanics.
Yeah.
Okay, so they're referring to a piece of the service called the Shmoneh.
Shmoneh.
And those 2 Hebrew words mean 18. It's a little tricky because this chunk of service today has 19 blessings. Thank you to the Cairo Geniza. We now know that there were 18, and at some point we split one or one got added. There's a whole history behind that, but it's this chunk of the service we usually refer to at Beth Chaim as the Amidah, which means the standing prayer. So this is Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei Avotenu v'Imotenu. For whom that sounds familiar, it is the central component of a prayer service, which is also why it's sometimes referred to as Hat Tefillah, the prayer. So there's lots of different pieces of a prayer service, but the one that always appears in the 3 daily services in Judaism is this component called the Shmoneh Esrei on weekdays. On Shabbat, we want to give God a little bit of a break. So there are 7 blessings instead of 19. But for a weekday, God has to go to work, and we're going to ask God for 18 things. /19. So that's what they're referring to right now. So this core, and it was not set in stone at the time of the Mishnah.
Mhm.
It was in flux. So the themes were set, but whoever was leading the service would add their spin to it. So it was a beautiful art form. So, okay, if the theme is God's power, I'm gonna, make up my own midrash and make my own prayer that's on that theme. And so you needed someone who had that skill set. But we want the person who has that skill set, who also has the really emotional drive to put these prayers out there. Okay, so that's our vocabulary lesson. Okay, now we're going to look at, okay, what are these 6 additional blessings? Okay, so some of these things may sound familiar to us. I'm going to read this slide because we have a bunch of Hebrew. These are the 6 additional blessings. Of course, this is the first opinion. Then we'll look at the alternative opinion. Number 1, zichronot, memory. Number 2, shofarot, blasts of the shofar. I'd like to remind us all, number 1 and 2 are also 2 of the 3 themes of the shofar service on Rosh Hashanah. So there's some overlap here. Number 3 is Psalm 120. In my distress, I called to the Eternal and God answered me. Number 4 is Psalm 121, sometimes referred to as Esa Enai. I turn my eyes to the mountains. From where will my help come? This is also we see this very much playing a role in mourning. So this is part of our morning liturgy. Esa Enai, it's also part of our High Holy Day liturgy. Number 5, Mima Amakim, out of the depths I call to you, O eternal God. And that's Psalm 130. And then another Psalm 102, a prayer of lowly man when he is faint. So here you see number 1 and 2 are the themes, and the person who is leading the service, this man with the open heart, he gets to sort of spin his own prayer for 1 and 2, as long as it's on the theme of memory and the shofar. And then 3, 4, 5, and 6, he is reciting these Psalms. And we often see Psalms used as meditations for when things are difficult. So in much of Jewish tradition, we're instructed to recite Psalms to bring comfort or to ask for help. So no surprise there. Okay, so that is opinion number 1, what we would call the majority opinion. But there's always a minority opinion. 2 Jews, 3 opinions. So now we have Rabbi Judah. So the author or the editor, I should say, of the text says, but wait a minute, I'm not so sure about that. You don't need to recite Zichronot and Shofarot. Maybe he thought, because we're going to do that at Rosh Hashanah anyway. I don't know. But he says, okay, instead of 1 and 2, here are 2 other texts. And here we have passages from the Book of Prophets. Passage number 1 from the Book of Kings, which is not often a piece of the Bible that we quote in a prayer context. If there is famine in the land, if there is pestilence. And then from the Book of Jeremiah, which does sometimes emerge in liturgical settings, the word of the Eternal, which came to Jeremiah concerning the droughts. And Rabbi Judah taught, as the person leading the service ends each of the 6 sections, then there has to be a specific concluding blessing, which we'll talk about in a moment. So, and with the formula being Baruch Atah Adonai, da 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 da. So as long as he keeps the theme of the section that he's supposed to and ends with Baruch Atah Adonai, da 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 da, we're good. He's fulfilled the obligation. What is the difference between these 2 opinions? What are the different messages being conveyed in each? Alan?
I think in Rabbi Judah's view, it's more directed to the immediacy of the famine and the drought, while the Zikarot and Shafarot could be used for almost anything. But this is a more specific, more general, more targeted approach.
Right. Rabbi Judah really wants to remind God of the immediate situation in which we find ourselves, which we have found ourselves in before. So it's interesting that it's almost a play on Zichronot, that remember God, we've been in this position before, but you helped us out. But it's really specific. Just like we were then, we are now, and we need your help. The idea of Zichronot and Shofarot, we often see in Jewish tradition of reminding God, remember how you cared for our ancestors. Don't forget us. Don't forget, you promised my ancestors you would take care of us. So it's like a no to God. And then number two, the shofar blast, I really see as trying to get God's attention. And so just like we blow the shofar at the new year to wake us up, we're also saying, God, we're here. Listen to us. We're trying to communicate with you. And so it's that dual purpose. Alan, and then I think Vivian had her hand up.
It's awfully anthropomorphic to be thinking of God that way.
Yes, I'm in biblical headspace. We've in Torah study on Saturday mornings. We've been talking a lot about the anthropomorphization of God. So I'm there. That's where I'm at. But just so even if there is a traditional concept of trying to wake up God, like I said, there's also that social aspect. If you're blowing the shofar through the streets, I might poke my head out of my house and say, "Oh, what's going on? Oh no, it's fast." Okay, so it hits both nails on the head. All right, now we're gonna dive even deeper into the Bible. I love this. So for the we ended the last slide with the appropriate concluding benediction. And here we get an explanation of what that is. Okay, so for number one, so we have these 6 added blessings. For number one, we refer to God as the one who answered Abraham on Mount Moriah shall answer you and hear the voice of your cry on this day. Blessed are you, Adonai, Baruch atah Adonai, who redeems Israel. Oh, and Hagit, if you could just do me a favor, since I don't have it in front of me, just read the Chatima in Hebrew.
Baruch atah Adonai Goel Israel. Is that it?
Israel, perfect. Yep. And then we'll do that for each one. For number 2, the one who answered our ancestors at the Sea of Reeds shall answer you and hear the voice of your cry on this day. Blessed are you, Adonai, who remembers all forgotten things.
Baruch atah Adonai zocher hanishkachot.
Okay. For number 3, the one who answered Joshua in Gilgal shall answer you and hear the voice of your cry on this day. Blessed are you, Adonai, who hears a blast.
Baruch atah Adonai shomea truah.
Truah. So one of the 3 calls that we use today.
Shofar.
Blast. Yep. Number 4, the one who answered Samuel in Mitzpah shall answer you and hear the voice of your cry on this day. Blessed are you, Adonai, who listens to cries.
Baruch atah Adonai shomea tza'aka.
Which is a word we see in the Bible over and over again when it's like an existential cry out to God. It's, it's not just it's like when the children of Israel were slaves in Egypt, God heard our great cry. That's the word that's used there. Number 5, the one who answered Elijah on Mount Carmel shall answer you and hear the voice of your cry on this day. Blessed are you, Adonai, who hears prayer.
Baruch atah Adonai shomea tefillah.
Tefillah, which is some of these chatimot that Hagit is reading are in our daily liturgy already.
Yes.
Not necessarily. So it's I wonder how the play intersected, but these are already familiar chatimot, closing lines of blessings in Jewish tradition. For number 6, the one who answered Jonah in the belly of the fish shall answer you and hear the voice of your cry on this day. Blessed are you, Adonai, who answers in time of trouble.
Baruch atah Adonai hamerachem al haaretz.
So the Hebrew is so much more beautiful than I think this translation.
Yes.
It's the merciful one, the one who has mercy and compassion on us. And we see this on the High Holy Days, that we are trying to appeal to God's mercy because we're afraid of God's justice. Please have mercy on us. Weak humans. Alan.
there is 6 additional prayer, and benedictions, but yet you have 7 of these.
Alan, it's as if I planted you. What's going on? We just hit 6. Why is there number 7? Let's come back to this question in just a moment. The one who answered David and Solomon, the first 2 kings of Israel, or sorry, the kings 2 and 3 of Israel, in Jerusalem shall answer you and hear the voice of your cry on this day. Blessed are you, Adonai, who has mercy upon the land. Oh, did we?
We read it.
We read
Baruch atah Adonai. Yeah, we just did that. That's okay.
Hold on, then let me take a look. What do I? We missed something. Something got wonky. Here we go. Did
No,
you
we
have
don't.
one for Joe? What was the Chatima for Jonah?
For Jonah, we did that. Baruch atah, no, we didn't.
Okay,
Baruch atah Adonai ha'oneh be'et tzara. You're right, we didn't. We skipped Jonah.
Oh, okay. So give me that Chatima one more time.
Baruch atah Adonai ha'oneh be'et tzara.
Okay. And last week we talked about the Hebrew word ta'anit, meaning fast, and the rabbis making a link to God answering us, same root in Hebrew. So here we have that return of that Hebrew verb that God answers us. And so we are fasting in our search for an answer from God, and we want that to be a sure, I'll give you rain. Okay, so we have 7. Why do I'm missing one here? 1 second. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, good. Okay, great. Why do we have 7?
We like the number.
Okay, so the rabbis definitely like the number 7. That's clear. Why else might we have 7 instead of 6?
7 days of the week.
7 days of the week. Fran?
Sorry, that's what I was going to say.
Oh, okay.
7 days of the week.
Any other theories why we might have 7? Evelyn?
One for good luck.
Great idea. So I do not know the answer to this question. Phyllis?
Well, it may be a Christian concept, 7 deadly sins.
Oh, interesting, which is not a Jewish tradition, but I think very much draws on the popularity of the number 7, without a doubt. But one of the questions that the rabbis are asking is there something we did wrong to warrant this negative situation we find ourselves in?
Well, I'm not a biblical scholar. Wasn't there 7 years with somebody, 7 years of drought and 7 years?
Yes. Beautiful.
Joseph, yes.
Exactly. So Joseph.
I'm a brilliant scholar.
You are a brilliant biblical scholar. And I love how we are making these biblical associations just like the rabbis were. So there were the 7 years of plenty in Egypt that Joseph predicted from Pharaoh's dream, followed by the 7 years of drought and famine, which very much play into this narrative. Ellen, did you have your hand up earlier?
No.
Okay. So I don't know the answer. One theory I have is how we had the dueling themes. If we go back to that slide, so we have Rabbi Judah versus the majority opinion. Is this a way that to hit like as many notes as possible? Is it that we originally had 6 and 1 snuck in? Is it to give some variety? I don't know. But lo and behold, we were talking about 6 and now we have 7. I think it plays beautifully into the fact that the Shmona Esrei, the part of the service that's called 18 blessings, has 19. One for good measure, I think is as good of a theory as any. But let's dive into the biblical stories that are being referenced here. Okay. Abraham on Mount Moriah. For those who may not be biblical scholars among us, this is the story of the Akedah, the binding of Isaac. God says to Abraham, go sacrifice your son, your beloved one, Isaac. Go up to this place which I will show you, which we identify in tradition as Mount Moriah, and almost sacrificed his son. Luckily, at the last moment, an angel calls out to Abraham and says, "What are you doing? Look over there. There's a ram in the bush with his horn caught in the bush." I'm including that detail on purpose. And it sacrificed that ram instead. So that is the story that is being referenced here. Why might it be part of the fast day narrative? Fran.
Because both are sacrifices. I mean, fasting is, I'm sorry.
Say more about that.
Well, I don't have much more to say. That we sacrifice food, we sacrifice having food, I guess, for in fasting for something in return. And we're supposed to sacrifice Isaac. I don't know if this is true because I don't know what's coming next, but is there a place in which you are asked then not to fast? Like you were asked not to like Abraham was asked not to sacrifice Isaac.
Yes, beautiful. That's definitely going to unfold. If not today, then definitely next week. But there are days that you're not supposed to fast, without a doubt. Pat.
Well, one of the things that distinguish Israel from the other ancient nations is that they practiced child sacrifice. So this is a way to distinguish Israel from the other people.
Okay. So it could be a little hint to the people that, you know, we do things differently than our neighbors do. And that's something that makes us special. And it's important for us to remember. Okay. Other thoughts? Evelyn.
Well, if there was ever a time you're going to have a prayer that's meaningful, right from the heart, it's when you're about to lose your son.
I hadn't thought about that, but this person who's supposed to lead the community, whose heart is supposed to be in the place of deep prayer, I agree. I would think Abraham in that moment with the knife over his son's head could very well be in that headspace. Yeah, Phyllis.
Well, the fact that the person leading this is supposed to specifically have children in the household says to me the message is there could be nothing more dreadful than the sacrifice of your children. And in this case, it was because you can't feed them. So I think that reference to children is a direct connection to the fact that Abraham was asked to sacrifice his child.
Absolutely. We would not be here if Abraham had sacrificed Isaac. So and we hear so frequently throughout the Bible about our fertility, both challenges and successes as a people. Without that, we will cease to be. And so if the future of our community is at stake, we're going back to the beginning with the moment where it almost all ended. I think that's a beautiful teaching. And then one other thought I had is if one of the themes is supposed to be shofarot, one of the proof texts for why we blow a ram's horn as the shofar is this story. That because of the ram whose horn got caught in the thicket, we blow that on Rosh Hashanah, the same holiday where we actually chant this story, the Akedah, the binding of Isaac, in Jewish tradition. So there's so many different layers here. There's no one right answer why that happens to be the first text at hand, but there's so many different entry points that we could go for. And I think the rabbis were really trying to create this rich tapestry of biblical associations. Let's go on to the Sea of Reeds, another popular story. We're now looking at the story of Passover, where the children of Israel finally escape Egypt, only to get stuck at the Sea of Reeds. It's too deep to wade through. It's too wide to go around, and Pharaoh's army is right behind them. Moses splits the sea. They walk on dry land. Moses puts the sea back, and Pharaoh and his army are drowned in the waters. Why is that story here? Phyllis.
When they go back to what you're saying, you're dealing with things of extinction. If Isaac had been killed, that's the end of us. If we don't make it across the Red Sea, that's the end of us. And all these are about if God does not intervene, we're minors. And if he doesn't intervene now, we're all going to die of starvation. So it's the extinction of the Jewish people and the Jewish faith.
Okay, so that existential threat piece, I love that. Fran and then Alan.
More mundane, I think, is that it has to do with water and then crossing on dry land.
That also spoke to me. Absolutely. Alan?
The second one is more of a positive act by God. He's actually doing something positive for the Jewish people by drying out the sea. In the first one, God is just sort of, just rectifying something that he started. So I think it's more. The second one is more in response to the prayers of and the crying out of the Jewish people.
Oh, fascinating. I also just thought about both of these as acts of faith. And how do we have to have faith in God, that God will care for us, that it will all work out okay. We know that those two stories did work out okay, but if we're the person saying these prayers, we're not sure how the story is going to end. Vicki?
What I find, I mean, I'm looking just for a minute on the entire list. And what I find is what the rabbis chose. They chose Abraham, Joshua, Samuel, Elijah, Jonah, David, and Solomon. Moses is out of the picture. He's not there. He's not mentioned. I mean, you just said Moses parted the sea. Well, yes, he was just, channeling God, of course, but he was the guy on, that we were looking at. Moses is not in the picture, which I find interesting that the rabbis chose not to put him in.
So let me tell you about the rabbis who really struggled with Moses. The rabbis, they struggled with Moses. How do we know? Moses isn't in the Haggadah.
I know.
The rabbis come up with a story where Moses sits in the front row, or I forget, he sits in Rabbi Akiva's classroom and has no idea what's going on, that he can't even fathom what the rabbis are talking about. But he gets told, oh, you gave us this Torah, Moses, don't worry about it. And he feels better. So the rabbis, we see, the rabbis are taking jabs at Moses here and there. Abraham becomes the biblical character for our rabbinic ancestors. And that is where we see some of the New Testament texts pulling from the same milieu and going back to Abraham and Adam, and cutting out Moses as well. The rabbis were doing the same exact thing. Right. I love it. It's not Moses, it's God who does it here. But yes, a beautiful, beautiful connection. Alan.
Interesting, because the rabbis do a lot of things that are sort of contrary to what the Torah says. So they sort of have to de-emphasize Moses while they're glorifying the Torah. They're also finding ways around a lot of things that they don't like anymore. So not having Moses up there makes it easier.
Right. Absolutely. I want to be sure we get to these other texts, but go ahead, finish up, Alan.
Didn't the oral Torah go to Moses also?
The oral Torah is the history, according to tradition of the oral Torah, is that it was also given by God at Mount Sinai to Moses.
So he knew that too. So why would he not know what's going on in class if it's his oral Torah? Exactly.
All right. We get to another story that I was not familiar with, as I have not read the book of Joshua very closely, but very similar to the Sea of Reeds story, only here now we're making the conquest into the land of Israel, and a dried up Jordan River would be one of those signs that, we have a problem here. If you are someone who's living in ancient Israel, that's actually one of the bodies of water you would be keeping a close eye on to see how are we doing with our water situation. So here it's to get the children of Israel into the land of Israel by crossing the Jordan River, which God miraculously dries up. So very similar to the Sea of Reeds story, but here now we're actually getting into the land, which is really at the heart of this ritual that we're talking about. Now we have Samuel in a place called Mitzpah, and the prophet urged the Israelites to give up foreign gods and fast in order to be saved by God from the Philistines. So here we see another existential threat, only this time it's not God or man, it's not God-made, it's man-made, that you have the Philistines, who were an arch enemy of the Israelites, and they were large and strong and had better weapons than we did, and we needed help to defeat them. And so the fast here is not to pray for rain, but to pray for military success. Ellen.
When they say fast, do they do that for a 24-hour period, for a week period?
Oh, you ask such a good question. Here we go. Fast forward. We'll come back to the slide in just a second. We did talk last week that it's mostly a daytime fast when the sun comes up and the sun comes down, but we see also they're not always consecutive days. So this slide is the community fast. And those are on days when the community gets together. In ancient Israel, that was Monday and Thursday. It was also Shabbat, but you're not supposed to fast on Shabbat if you can help it. If you can help it. We'll talk about that later. But this is why in Jewish tradition, Torah reading days during the week are Monday and Thursday. Those were market days. So everyone would go to the market on Monday and Thursday. It's when basically the farmers from the outlying lands would come into the town and they would be together as a community. So if you're going to have a communal fast, they weren't even on consecutive days. So, but it was typically, Ellen, when the sun came up to when the sun went down. Okay, let's go back in time. Okay. All right. So we talked about the military fast. For Samuel, Elijah on Mount Carmel, the prophet heard God in a still small voice. So I tried to figure out what the connection was here. And there seems to be a tradition that Elijah was fasting. This was the prophet Elijah as he was running away from Queen Jezebel. After reading the biblical text, it looks a whole lot more like he was running away and didn't have anything to eat. And God then came in and actually feeds Elijah, saying, you need a break. I'm going to take care of you. Here's a meal. And so, but it seems to be a traditional understanding that he was fasting before that. So that could be the connection. But this is actually a really beautiful story where there's a fire, but God was not in the fire. And then there's a whirlwind, but God was not in the whirlwind. And it was only when Elijah listens for that still small voice that he can actually hear God. How does that play into what we're talking about here? Although Alan looks like he's wrestling with something.
Well, it's a sidebar, but it's interesting that didn't the raven feed Elijah carrion in the desert? When he did, I always found that interesting because you have an unclean bird giving a carrion to a prophet, and that's glorified. So I thought that's interesting. Kind of interesting.
I'm not familiar with that story, but if you are starving to death, you can eat anything you find.
Absolutely.
According to Jewish tradition. So to save a life, you break the laws of kashrut. No big deal. Okay, but let's go back to this question of Elijah. Why the still small voice? Vivian, go for it.
Okay, I think because you don't find God in the big ceremonies and impressive rituals in fancy dress. You find God in the everyday, the still small voice. It's always there, and it's true and sincere. It's not the show, but as we said before, you know, I don't want your fast.
I like that idea. Evelyn.
I had a slightly different slant. I think it's very easy to believe in God when the miracle is great. And it takes a whole lot more faith if it's just something, the still small voice, if it's more subtle, that you don't need the pizzazz when it's so blatant and clear.
I think that's a beautiful contrast to some of these earlier stories that are the big public showy miracles. But Ellen, it looked like you were wrestling with something. No?
No,
Okay.
with Arnold.
That we can't help you with.
Arnold went to clear up the patio because it got very dark here. To come.
All right, just given how much time we have left, Jonah, the prophet called out to God from the belly of a large fish. At least Jonah was afraid that he may not make it out alive, but that when we call out, God hears us. And we have to assume that he didn't have anything to eat in the belly. So I think that might be another connection as well. We just got a PJ Library book, Oh No, Jonah, which is the story of Jonah told in rhyme for kids. And like, there's a part of it where he's like, ew, this food in this fish's belly is gross. So like, it's like rotted, decomposing food in the belly, or digested food. It was just very interesting. So I have that thought in my mind. And then King David and King Solomon, kings number 2 and 3 after King Saul didn't really make it very long. I'm trying to, I couldn't find the clear connection between Solomon and fasting, but it's very clear that Solomon prayed directly to God. However, does anyone know when David fasted?
After the story with Bathsheba, the
Correct.
first baby that died.
So David sleeps with Bathsheba, and sends her husband, because she's married, off to the front lines to die. Turns out Bathsheba becomes pregnant, and that child's life is at risk. David prays to God to let the child live, and he fasts in that prayer. And what happens to the baby?
Dies.
That baby dies. Next baby though becomes King Solomon. So that's how the story ends, or continues, I should say. But here we have a story where the king of Israel sinned, according to the prophet Prophet Nathan, and then prays to God and fasts, but the answer is no. And I think that it's not an accident that that story is referenced here. That at the end of the day, given all of our fasting, given all the intention we may pour into this, what might be the answer to our prayers? No. And so how do we wrestle with that? We don't have to answer that right now, but it's definitely lingering here in all of this talk of the ritual of Ta'anit, of fasting. Phyllis.
Well, the other thing, if you go back to Elijah, maybe the message there is, if you don't listen carefully enough, God may be responding and you're not hearing it. The one is, yeah, he's going to say this. The last one is, this was maybe not, but there's also, maybe you're not hearing his response because you're either not fasting enough or sincere enough. So maybe that it says you have to really listen.
That's beautiful. Evelyn.
Maybe if you get the no, you just keep mourning, because some no's are so deep and so problematic. And I always think of the Holocaust, of the people who went into the camps and went into the gas chambers with believing with a perfect heart, but it was still no.
And I often talk about what's the purpose of prayer if God doesn't hear us. And I often will say to those who ask this question, what if God absolutely hears our prayer, but sometimes the answer is no? What do we then do to move forward? And I really love what you said, Evelyn, that we have to mourn. So is part of what we're doing with this ritual of Ta'anit a practice for the mourning that's to come? So maybe, yes, maybe there is this sympathetic magic element of it, but maybe it's also a dress rehearsal for the mourning we're anticipating that is to come. Fran.
I wonder, I just looked up Ashes on Ash Wednesday, and there's a component here that is a little different. It is mourning. It says it's for mourning the death of Christ, but it also says that it's repentance because he died for their sins. And of course, there is also an element of fasting in Lent. It's not fasting for a whole day, but you give up some food. So I'm wondering where repentance shows up here, if it does at all.
Absolutely.
If it's, yeah, if it's the earlier slide, which said, don't show it by rending your clothes, but show it in your behavior. If the behavior is a repentance.
Absolutely. And if we go back to I think there's no accident that Jonah is mentioned not once, but twice in this chapter, that it's all about our actions. And we need to look inside before we can ask God to affect the outside. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I want to just frame it in the ancient world. Their theological outlook was when something bad happens, it must have been because of something that we did. And I want to be very clear that is an ancient worldview, not ours, or not often ours in our Jewish community, but still exists in the Jewish world. And so there's often this reflection piece of where did I or we go wrong, and how can we do better going forward? And what for me, I want to focus on that second piece is how do we do better going forward, as opposed to making the direct link that my actions caused this cosmic existential crisis. But is there something I can do to make the world a better place or to improve my situation or my community? Phyllis, did you want to share something?
No, just listening.
Okay, Ellen.
Since I wasn't here last week, I guess I have to ask, have we always fasted? And if we have always fasted, how far back did this start?
Aha. So we see elements of spontaneous fasting all throughout the Bible.
But this is a holiday that we fast.
No. So this is the context of this fasting is all when the rain doesn't come when it's expected.
Okay.
So that was what we talked about last week, is that if there's certain benchmarks on the Jewish calendar, if it doesn't rain at some point during Sukkot, we start getting nervous. Then if it doesn't start raining by the next Hebrew month, we get even more nervous. And then if we get even further down the road and it hasn't rained yet, we're in crisis mode. So that there's different stages of fasting, and it ramps up as time goes on and there's still no rain. But we see that from the Bible that our people have been fasting for millennia for all different reasons. We fast to repent. We fast in a sense of mourning. We fast in ourselves in anticipation. If we think about Esther as she fasted in anticipation of going to King Ahasuerus to say, please save my people. We in Jewish tradition, the bride and groom are supposed to fast leading up to the wedding ceremony. It's tied to this cleansing, but also starting fresh and really having that moment of introspection. So the Ta'anit mostly deals with the fasting in response to no rain. But we'll see next week how we start to expand on that a little bit. We didn't get through all of chapter 2, but that is okay, because we got through all of the pieces that I thought were the most beautiful and compelling. I really, sometimes when the rabbis bring in a biblical text, it almost seems perfunctory, like, oh, look, there's a word that matches, or it's really to demonstrate why it became part of the liturgy or the ritual. But here we have the narratives of our people really tying into the existential crisis that we find ourselves in, and how can recalling these biblical stories, exploring how our ancestors suffered and many times, although not always, were saved, how does that give us hope and inspiration that we too will not be forgotten, and that we will get through this, and we will continue that line that started with Abraham. And on that note, thank you so much for joining me today. I will send everyone the slides and the link to the recording. And if you have friends who couldn't make it, And I'll send the link will be to the recording for last week and this week. And I'll send out the PowerPoint from last week for those who weren't able to join us.
Thank you
Thank
very
you,
much.
Rabbi. Thank you.
Rabbi.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
For those who
Bye.
haven't listened yet,
Bye.
Marilyn. And I'll see you soon.
Bye.
Let me see.